Welcome back to every Doctor Who ever. Today we're talking about Season 5. It's the second season with the second Doctor, so let's see where we all go with this, right? This season is a lot more interesting than the previous season. I was not the biggest fan of the previous season, but here's really where Doctor Who gets into its typical, every story type thing of we're in a new setting, there's the monster. Deal with the monster, Doctor. Let's hope things don't go bad. This season is a lot more sci-fi focused than ever before, and it will stick that way in the series going forward. And a little bit of a shift in terms of who is in charge and how this series is run happens throughout this season and the next, leading into the end of our black and white era. The producer this season will be Inez Lloyd, who will ultimately go through a little bit of it, and towards the end, eventually Peter Bryant, who will be co-producing with him for parts of the show, will eventually be the main producer. He'll still be the script editor, but he'll get help from Derek Sherwin, who eventually will be the producer himself. Bryant's own assistant, Victor Pemberton, acted as script editor on certain serials throughout this season, but went uncredited, as ultimately he didn't want to be full-time script editor. We begin with Tomb of the Cybermen. Director is, of course, the Moonbase director, Morris Berry, a man who ultimately knows a little bit about the Cybermen, alongside Kid Pedler and Gary Davis, who, of course, invented the Cybermen in the first place. We're in good hands in terms of what to do with the Cybermen, as they introduce a weird, crazy idea on the fact that the Cybermen seemingly just are in, weird pyramids that they just leave on planets. Weirdly, we haven't seen too much of these tombs in general, but we've seen versions of what exactly goes on in this base that the characters now go throughout the episode. This is the earliest second Doctor serial to survive in its entirety, from its recovery in the early 90s until the recovery of Enemy of the World in 2013. TARDIS arrives on Talos, where an archaeological expedition led by Professor Perry is trying to uncover the lost tombs of the Cybermen, which in terms of the far-ass future on when this takes place, the Cybermen haven't been seen for a good while and are a bit of a legend. One of the party, Klieg, reveals himself and his business partner, Kaftan, to be apparently planning to revive the Cybermen. Throughout the storyline, they attempt to interfere with how the group is going about their research, and they are attempting to apparently try and control the Cybermen. But obviously that doesn't, work well for them. Ultimately, after they uncover the oddities that is the tomb, as a lot of it is traps to just bring in people to cyberize them, they eventually find the hidden Cybermen that are stuck down there and frozen. The Doctor really wants them to not unfreeze them, but obviously, they get unfrozen, and they now have to deal with the fact that the Cybermen are just kind of roaming around. Klieg and Captain ultimately, mess up everything as they attempt to try to talk to the Cybermen, which doesn't work out. Before Klieg gets a laser gun and goes, now I have a gun, now they'll have to listen to me. Which, of course, doesn't work. So, great job, idiot. It's just funny that he tried to, use a gun. He was like, yeah, surely they're listening to me. And when he brings out the cyber leader, who in this is essentially a Cyberman with a weird, bulbous head, which was supposed to glow, but, effects budget and all. But when he brings him out of the little, sewer grate that they have in their freezy chamber, right? This, of course, he turns on him immediately, and because why would that work? Why would that have worked? They have guns in them. They're robot men. What? Thankfully, with help of Captain's assistant, whose name is Toberman, though every time she says it, it sounds like Turbo Man, from Jingle All the Way, so that's what I kept hearing the entire special, are able to actively overpower the Cybermen in what is kind of a hilarious scene, ultimately trapping them down back in their freezy chamber, shutting the whole thing down and, kicking the key under the door, hoping that no one would ever come out of the tomb. Obviously, eventually they would, so, whatever. This story is also the first appearance of the Cybermats, some of which were radio-controlled and, battery-powered, but others were just, on a string. Tomb of the Cybermen, known as Matt Smith, the 11th Doctor's favorite story of this era, is a very smart and very interesting story that I find incredibly entertaining throughout. Not only is it a great showing of both the Doctor and Jamie, as they have some very funny moments, my favorite being when they accidentally hold each other's hands. I love our two gay dads. And the slow and subtle build up to the fact that this is not actually a place that is easy to explore and is filled with horrible traps, which is meant to purposefully be similar to what people sort of assume that like Egyptian pyramids are like, kind of similar to a bit of a Indiana Jones type thing. It's this neat little adventure of suddenly we have to deal with these horrible consequences that we've now decided to dig up. With it happening, you know, in a sci-fi type way, Tomb of the Cybermen ultimately ends up being another great showing of the Cybermen by the guys who helped invent them. Adding more of this crazy technology to the Cybermen and adding little Cybermats really adds to them as a race and really adds to, you know, what you could really do with them more and more as they continue to appear and become more and more the second most iconic villain in the entire franchise. It is a very subtle story that takes its time, certainly, but doesn't waste your time. Those 6 episodes, it does feel like it actively uses its pacing very properly to subtly build its cast, of which I find all very well written, including the guy who I think is still a little bit stupid with the whole gun thing, but also really has good showings of our main 2 guys, and also Victoria is there as well. She ultimately, you know, really begins her path of being a character who is often used as, oh no, she's attacked by the monsters as she gets shoved into like a vacuum chamber, which sucked for the actress because she has a horrible claustrophobia. So I'm sure that was a fun little section to film. Still though, I think in terms of this era and really good Cybermen storylines, this is certainly one of them. This is one that they specifically picked in order to represent the Second Doctor. That's mostly because it has, you know, all of its footage still remaining, but it is still a very good story of the Cybermen. You know, there's no weird convoluted plan. It is, you're in their little trap area, now you gotta deal with them, stupid. And yeah, the Doctor is like, oh my god, I gotta make sure these guys don't die right now. And it's a really good showing of his character to be like, hey man, you don't want to be here, but you sure are here, so I guess I have to help you now, because if I don't, you'll get killed by these, you know, awful robots that I have now dealt with 2 times. Overall, I definitely say this is one that is a must-watch in terms of the Second Doctor's era. It's one of his best storylines from just, like, every point. And it's probably one of the best of the black and white era, and really shows you the fact that despite the low budget of the series and the way that it happens to, you know, make it everything happen, it is able to really pull out some great sci-fi that doesn't feel like sci-fi schlock or something that wastes your time. You know, this felt like they used their time wisely and knew what they were doing going into it and how to treat both the characters and the villains so that everyone matters in the story. And it's like, that's exactly what I want. Why can't every story in this era be more like this story? Directed by Gerald Blake, who would later do Invasion of Time in season 15, for God's sakes, a director for a numerous amount of British sci-fi shows, and written by Mervyn Heisman, who would later help with Web of Fear, and Henry Lincoln, who is best known for his non-fiction book The Holy Blood and Holy Grail, which provided the inspiration for the very popular Dan Brown novel, The Da Vinci Code. Second Doctor, Jamie and Victoria expect to be welcomed as they arrive at a monastery in the 1930s in Tibet, but the Doctor is soon accused by an explorer of apparently trying to take his research and discredit him. The man is known as Travers, and he's been looking into the abominable snowmen. The Yeti are apparently a real thing, as we do see a little bit in the last little section of this story, but the ones we do find in this story are not them. Eventually, the other 2 who are attacked by the mentioned abominable snowmen, they escape and eventually meet up with the monastery and do tell Travers that, no, the Doctor's fine. Having been accused of controlling the Yeti, he's actually placed on trial by the monks who almost tried to kill him. But due to the fact that the Doctor happened to bring out Bell from his funny little chest that is in the TARDIS, the bell is given to the guy in charge of the monastery, the Immortal Master, whose name I will not try and pronounce. Tells the monks, oh my god, don't kill that man. Also, why are you gonna kill that man? We're monks. The Yeti attempt to attack the monastery, of which, because they're slow lumbering beasts, one of which is taken down and depowered, the Doctor ultimately does an autopsy on it and finds out that it is a robot controlled by a weird moving metal ball that is controlled somewhere from the distance. Seeing this, the monks are told to evacuate, but one of the head but one of the people in charge starts working with the Doctor a little bit more to kind of pay for the fact that he was about to kill the man. So he decides to try and guard the monastery. Ultimately, him and his group are overpowered due to the fact that someone seems to be working with the Yeti. One of the abbots, Songston, is apparently being controlled by the Great Intelligence, some force that is controlling the Yetis and their little robot balls, which has the power to also influence other people. Travers does attempt to try and go look for where exactly the power seems to originate, and he is seeing that some of the balls are forming into pyramids, which do some crazy wacky stuff. And Victoria basically soon figures out that the Immortal Master happens to be being controlled by the Intelligence. But the Doctor is able to do hypnosis to get her out of this weird fugue state that she was forced into. Eventually helps Travers figure out the fact that the Master is, of course, being controlled by the Intelligence. We get this awesome standoff with the Second Doctor and the Intelligence, as ultimately they're able to destroy the machines that allow the Intelligence to actually get there in the first place. Due to this, the Immortal Master does pass away from there forward, and he looks, God, so creepy, especially in animated form. Travers and the monks do thank them, but they're also, not sure why they were even here in the first place, or if a time-traveling box is even a real thing. But at least they got Belle back, so, Only 2 episodes exist in the archives, with the whole story being fully animated. Of course, the main way I watched it, I found it perfectly fine. I found it a pretty well done animation. Deborah Watling, the actress of Victoria, found it her favorite story due to the fact that Travers is played by her dad, so ultimately she had a lot of fun working with her father. The production was constantly beset with rainfalls, which constantly delayed filming and also caused a lot of the crew to unfortunately slip around, and one of the workers who was in the costume of the Yeti nearly slipped and fell, and people assume that he died. Bro fell hundreds of feet, and thankfully to the big mascot suit he was wearing, he was perfectly fine. The Yeti are my favorite part of this little story. They were not described in detail, so costume designer Martin Baugh decided to just make him look like a big fuzzy bear, and boy, sure do they. I love the Yetis so much. They're so funny looking. They walk slowly, and they're these goofy little guys, dude. I'm not threatened by these monsters. I love these things. I love them. I would love a whole fucking... Can I have a Yeti plush? Come on, look at these things. These aren't terrifying. They're cuddly. They're adorable. The Abominable Snowman is, despite the fact that the Yetis are not at all threatening in the slightest, it's actually a very entertaining story. I find Travers to be a very enjoyable character. I find him to be a character that I wouldn't mind seeing again. We do see him again later, which we'll get to in a little bit, but it would have been cool to see more of him. I find these characters to be a lot more interesting, and it does suck, to have a Doctor Who story which immediately starts with, you're part of the bad guys, which will sure continue to happen, but at the immediate change of him going, oh, I was wrong, oh my god, is so refreshing. That's probably why I enjoy him so much. But I think he's just done so well by Watling that it's just, he comes off as a much more interesting character than the very simplistic way it often is in classic Doctor Who. A lot of these characters seem more interesting and a lot more grounded in this story. It's very well written, it's very well paced, it doesn't waste your time. I'd say the first episode or so, again, when they're accusing the Doctor, isn't my favorite part of the story. I don't like that whole trope that happens too much in Doctor Who, but thankfully it's done very quickly, and we have the fun Yetis and the weird magnetic balls. It makes me think of, oh my god, I'm gonna forget the name, but I'm gonna put it on screen. I love that. It's weird sci-fi stuff, and that it is both unironically enjoyable due to the fact that it is well written, and also it's just weird and fun, and that's the kind of fucking Doctor Who story I want. It's weird and fun and well written enough that I can ignore the fact that some of it is a little bit goofy. And if it's paced properly and has good enough effects, that is all I ask from Doctor Who, and I feel like The Abominable Snowman is an absolute must-watch for this era. Again, it is a little bit hard considering the state that it is in, but I would recommend going to find that animation and also the scenes that are still around from the episodes that do exist and absolutely checking it out. This was one of my favorites when I first watched the Classic Who era in my initial watch a few years ago, and it was still incredibly enjoyable to re-go through it and re-experience the oddity that is the abominable snowman. Next up, we are still in snow, which, mind you, because of the cold climate from Evil of the Daleks, we have been in very, cold temperatures for several episodes now, and that will continue with the Ice Warriors. Still in the snow, we are in the Ice Age of the year 5000, apparently. The director of this storyline is Derek Martinez, who had done 4 previous stories. The writer is Brian Hills, who had previously did The Smugglers and The Celestial Toymaker. So 4 out of the 6 episodes still exist, so you are able to watch a majority of those without any real problems, but the missing episodes do result in a little bit of oddities from episodes 2 and 3, of which you'll have to figure out a good way to watch them. All found in 1988, they make a relatively complete enough story that thankfully has some of my favorite monsters in the entire series, the Ice Warriors. The Ice Warriors, which by the way is the name that is came up with by one of the researchers who finds the mentioned Ice Warrior in the Antarctic, or at least in a glacier. I'm unclear where they are, but due to it being an ice age in this time, it could literally be New Jersey. So whatever. Scientists, commanded by Leader Clint, are using the ionizer device to melt a big old glacier, which, of course, they say glacier because they're British, and I kept being a little bit confused on what kind of glass they were talking about before realizing they're saying glacier. I think it's also for some kind of, power, they could, use, the melted glacier for something, but that's unimportant because in the process, they find, of course, a Martian spaceship. A Martian spaceship and also the mentioned Ice Warriors. Varga, the captain of the Martian spacecraft, attempts to use the ionizer device to bring back his Ice Warriors and possibly conquer Earth. Considering it is in the middle of the Ice Age, I don't know how far you'd get, but also I don't know how far they'd be able to go against you. So pretty sure at this time, everyone's busy fighting the Cybermen during the Cyber Wars or whatever's happening in future Earth, like time period. But here are the Ice Warriors. They sure are here. And they sure are wearing crocodile armor. I do love them, their weird design, their thick-ass booties, and their weird Lego hands. God, I love the Ice Warriors. They're essentially lizard dudes in, armor that's meant to be inspired relatively by, medieval period type armor. Their design is, I think, they obviously, because of course they do, kidnap Victoria, and Jamie and another scientist go and look for her. They're attacked, shot by a laser, and Jamie survives, but he's paralyzed for the rest of the story. They almost get eaten by a bear, which was an actual bear that was filmed at the, BBC studios. But yeah, that sure happens. Jamie does not have a fun time during this adventure at all. So the doctor has to now find Victoria, with help of a scientist who went off on his own and didn't want to be part of the stupidity that happens with the research team that we'll see throughout the episode. Has just been living on its own with some strange wild homeless man. After her life is threatened, the doctor actually quickly goes, okay, fine. And it's a very nice showing of the fact that the doctor, though he does push boundaries sometimes, is not a man who's fine with just sacrificing the people that he is in charge of, right? He has been tasked with taking care of this girl, and he's going to make sure she's not going to die in the friggin' Arctic. They're kept there, but thanks to the fact that the doctor got some stinky gas, they're able to fight against the Ice Warriors. They try and stop them from launching their craft, but unfortunately the big Lego hand is able to press the button. Thankfully, the other researcher, Penley, goes to take charge of the researchers, who at this point have been arguing throughout all 6 of the episodes on what to do. Throughout the whole time, they are constantly at the just whim of a computer. They constantly ask it what they should do, as if it's the magic conch shell from SpongeBob. And they're essentially at the end of the Kelp Forest story, where Squidward just keeps getting a
"Can't you say anything else but no?"
Try asking again.
"Can I have something to eat?"
No.
And it's up to Penley to finally take control of the situation, which stops them from getting totally obliterated by the fact that the Martian spaceship, if they explode near them, would kill all of them. He figures out a way to help it basically get further away up into space before completely exploding, saving everyone. It's a actually very interesting interpretation of the fact that the reliance on technology might become a problem for humanity in the future. Whether or not this story really meant to, the fact that it talks about AI, I find very interesting. Right, this idea of the commentary of the fact that AI will get smarter and it will be more helpful, but the reliance on it and the fact that that will be a possible problem in the future is something that the story, whether meant to or not, ends up talking about. And the fact that these people are essentially children with the incapability of free thought because they are constantly at the whims of what this computer will process and tell them to do, firmly believing that it has all of their best interests in mind, when the fact that in reality it doesn't. It's fully about to Ed 209 them. There you go. I meant HAL 9000, but also, it would probably make a robot to shoot them as well. But regardless, the fact that they rely on this computer is a very interesting part of the story. That does result in the characters being a little bit one note, but also it ends up having a very interesting commentary that I think is its best part. Now, of course, there is the Ice Warriors. They're fun, but they're very typical, aliens, we're gonna take over the planet, and they're actively the least interesting part of the story, which is then them, weird homeless Iceman, bear, and then computer AI commentary. This is a fun story. I think it's a very well-written story. I love the Ice Warriors, mostly for their design, their goofy little Lego hands, and I find it very entertaining throughout. I think it was pretty well paced, not so as much as the previous couple, but it doesn't feel like I wasted my time watching this. I didn't feel like I needed to skip certain episodes. I found it very enjoyable. This one is a recommendation, not necessarily a must-watch if you are a fan of the types of monsters that will be reoccurring like the Ice Warriors. Then yeah, I'd say this one is definitely high on the list of ones you probably should watch, but if you want to skip over it, it's not, the biggest deal. But I would say this one you should probably watch it. It is a good, well-written plot from the Second Doctor's time, and you'd be really missing out on the introduction of the Ice Warriors. I should note, constantly, as we'll see throughout this season, Victoria is a absolute fucking waste of time, and she absolutely does nothing. She just always gets captured, and the only use that she was pretending to cry so the Doctor could get the stink gas ready. That is it. That is the one thing she does. God, she's worthless. Next up is the Enemy of the World. Only episode 3 existed for years until October 2013, when the remaining 5 episodes were found in Nigeria. Thus, the entirety of this story still exists, and that is great. This one is absolutely, this one is a fun one. It doesn't have a weird monster. It is in the future of 2018. Yeah. It's directed by Barry Letts, the eventual producer of the show during the third Doctor's time, with his first ever contribution to Doctor Who, and of course written by David Whittaker, which, if you've been following along, is a regular writer during this era. In the future of 2018, yes, actually, they're found by some people who apparently recognize them. They're attacked but soon saved by Astrid Farrier, who brings them on her little helicopter. Bringing to her boss, Giles Kent, the Doctor finds out that he is a perfect double of Salamander. The man whose last name is Salamander is a guy who apparently is trying to infiltrate this system that has essentially replaced the UN, the World Zone Authority, and is trying to become dictator of the world. He is a crazy, megalomaniacal man who ultimately is good with his words and has a lot of supporters. Sounds very familiar to enter politician here. The Doctor is persuaded to impersonate Salamander, and his companions go out to try and infiltrate Salamander's base in Hungary. There they use their new roles to get close to Farrier, Salamander's food tester, hoping to gain any amount of information. Farrier, after a little hesitancy, reveals that she's actually blackmailed into her role. Jamie attempts to cause a diversion, but then is arrested. Salamander discovers that he's been impersonated and returns to the research station where Jamie and Victoria have been put. At the same time, the Second Doctor also tries to infiltrate, pretending that he's Salamander, and ultimately, you were thinking they're going to meet up at some point, and that was initially the idea of having the two people played by the same actor to meet up, but that doesn't really happen. Instead, the people working under him get a little bit confused, and after a little tussle involving some of the guards, which ends up getting Farrier killed, the main head of security is then told by the Second Doctor what Salamander is doing, and he begins to work alongside the Second Doctor. Jamie and Victoria do leave the plot soon enough later, as ultimately the Second Doctor decides on his own to infiltrate the underground lab where Salamander has kept researchers who have been developing machines to cause natural disasters. He's actively told them that the world has been irradiated, and it is in doing so of them causing natural disasters that they can hope change the world's atmosphere. Turns out he's just doing it to gain political favor and hopefully then nearly end the world with his decided superior race taking over. It's a plot you've seen probably in certain other shows of, blow everything up, evil villain, man. Here he is. He sure is evil. After enough evidence is brought together, we soon find out that Giles Kent has in fact been working with Salamander and has been attempting to continue his plan as he's been helping him do it this whole time. But he wanted to actively remove Salamander from the equation. Ultimately, after being exposed, both of our villains attempt to escape with Kent being shot by Salamander. After his base fully explodes, I believe the researchers getting out before the explosion, he attempts to actually impersonate the second Doctor, leading to their actual and only confrontation. Oddly, he actually makes the TARDIS work, which ends up sending them careening to their next destination. Unfortunately, the door was open, so the man falls into the time vortex. God knows what happens to him. So now the weird part of the plot is, again, the fact that it is in 2018. Again, from the perspective of 1960 something, that is an acceptable idea for a future, but later the novelization decided 2030, which is still close. I'd imagine whatever it is, the World Zone Authority is probably just like a smaller group of allied countries that have decided to pretend their zones are important. Astrid's actor, Mary Peach, apparently decided to work in Doctor Who due to the fact that her kids wouldn't believe she was a real actress till she'd be in Doctor Who. Chief of Security Bruce's actor, Colin Douglas, actually hated working on the serial, regarding Doctor Who as low-grade children's fare and is well beneath his dignity. He would return as Reuben in Horror of Fang Rock. As producer Inez Lloyd's last story, it is one to certainly go off on. It is an incredibly well-written story. It's this awesomely paced, slow-moving story that feels suspenseful the entire time due to the fact that they are slowly infiltrating the base of an evil villain. It gives off major, James Bond vibes. It's this suspenseful, political drama that Doctor Who often doesn't really do. It's a lot less sci-fi than previous stories. Sure, there's weird machines and sci-fi stuff in there. There's an underground base and all that, but there's no, monsters or any weird stuff unlike a lot of other Doctor Who stories. It's very unique in that way, and that it sure is a sci-fi plot, but it's a sci-fi plot in the same way as Doctor No is, Having our evil Bond villain be the main villain of the story is an interesting ploy, and plus the fact that it's also played by Patrick Troughton, who puts on a whole other performance and has to somehow not confuse himself as they attempt to confuse the audience on purpose on who is he and where is he, is always incredibly entertaining. I love the double play they do with the same actor with two characters. I love the fact that this whole story really does attempt to use its time incredibly wisely as it builds up who Salamander is and why he is as bad as he is, and why people would want to follow him and why he has so much power, but why he is a man that needs to be taken down. And it's not immediately go kill him, it is find dirt on him, find out what he's doing and his plan, and infiltrate his base. And that's what I love about this story. It taps into what I enjoy, again, about James Bond, but in Doctor Who, and that's why I absolutely love this story. This one, to me, is the best second Doctor story. That might change in the next season as I decide to remember stuff about season 6, but I absolutely adore this story. This one is so incredibly fun. If you are looking for any story to watch, especially one that is complete, this is one. This is an absolute must-watch for people getting into classic Doctor Who, especially the second Doctor era. And if you have to watch any story from this season, it is this one. You have to. Next up is the Web of Fear. Web of Fear is mostly complete. Episode 3 is completely missing, and that is unfortunate. If you're looking for a good way to watch that, you'll probably find a weird fan animation, which was made for it, which sticks out like the sorest of thumbs possible. Now we have producer Peter Brine, again the previous script editor. The writers are Mervyn Heisman and Henry Lincoln are back from Snowmen, of course, with director being Douglas Camfield, who, if you're following along, had previously did several stories for this series like The Crusade, Time Meddler, and the Daleks' master plan. TARDIS, after stabilizing itself, is trapped in some sticky space webs, which of course ends up being controlled by the Great Intelligence. They find themselves in the London Underground, where soon they're met by the Yetis. The Yetis look a little bit different. They were purposefully redesigned. Same thing goes for Travers. He is back. The actor's daughter laughed a lot when she saw the old man makeup, and so do I, to be honest. Look at that. God, old people makeup never worked. When the Doctor gets there, everyone's pretty confused. They're like, who are you? And though Travers first attempts to be like, no, they're friends, they know what's going on, his daughter starts accusing them, which makes him go, oh, right, maybe they do know what's going on. Which, yes, is the second time that this series has that happening, of him coming in and Travers thinking that he wants something to do with the Yeti, even though, dude, you should know better. This story does take place 40 years in the future from the previous Abominable Snowman story, which is kind of interesting because it relatively makes it around the same time frame of when the unit stuff would happen, which is interesting. It's certainly beforehand because this also involves my favorite character of the series. The army forces that they start hanging alongside and trying to help are at first led by Captain Knight, but then by Colonel Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart. It's the Brig. It's the Brigadier. He's here, Brigadier. He's fucking here, the Brigadier. He's my favorite fucking character. The Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart is my favorite fucking character of the entirety of Doctor Who. Immediately, he starts, vouching for the Doctor. He's like, oh, he's pretty cool. Him and his amazing mustache will ultimately grace us throughout the entirety of the third Doctor's era, which is why I really enjoy that era. And anytime he ever shows up, it is always a joy. But here he, instantly trusts him. In fact, it's the Doctor and friends that don't trust him as much, especially when it becomes clear that the Yetis are a little bit too prepared, and it's clear that someone's working with them. And yet, going back, you're like, yeah, it's not the Brig, right? It can't be, duh. But at no point does he try to distrust them, and that's what makes him great. It's just the fact that I hate the trope of it's you, stranger, you're the bad guy. What the? Shut up. You have no proof of this at all. It's never not annoying in Doctor Who, and it will keep happening. But starting in episode 3, he really takes over and begins to help them out. It's essentially trying to plot a way not just out of the London Underground, but also a way to get to wherever the base of the Yetis are to take them down. There's a whole awesome action scene in the middle of this where they have a shootout against the whole Yetis. The whole story is, I think, very well paced in the fact that it slowly has the characters uncover what the intelligence is trying to do. The story subtly builds into the fact that someone is in control who they are and is pretending to not be controlled by the intelligence, and it does a very good job of it when it eventually reveals it to be character who was in episode 1 and then not through most of the story till coming back suddenly. The way that character's acting, you're thinking, oh, it's not him, and when it is him, you're like, oh shit, okay, I didn't know you could act like a human while being controlled. They do, mind you, also mind control Travers, so it's not like it really mattered in the first place, but okay. It was a neat little mystery that I think they did well, actually, to be honest. Not the greatest of all time, it's not fucking Sherlock Holmes, thank God, but the Doctor has a cool little plan where he actually hacks into one of the walls and ultimately is able to help it track him to a Yeti and uses that Yeti to help fight against the other Yetis. He attempts to purposefully get captured and then try to drain the mind draining machine that the intelligence has. But Jamie, the absolute MVP that he is, actively tries to help out the Doctor and ends up ruining the Doctor's plan. Yeah, they beat the Great Intelligence and stop the Yetis and are able to save enough people that it's not a whole wash. But the Doctor had a whole plan on it, how to make the Great Intelligence a stupid, weird little thing. Unfortunately, now letting it retreat back to God knows where in space for an eventual return. That wouldn't happen for 40 years and would actively technically be a prequel to this story, taking place in between the two plots. I think this episode is a very entertaining one. I think it is a great follow-up to the previous Yeti-involved storyline. The best paced one, I did just say I think it does a good job building up its mystery, but I feel like it could have been one episode shorter of maybe a little bit less in the underground. It does feel like they're about to sort of figure it out, but then they're we gotta stay in the underground for a bit, so we're still here. But I still think it's a well enough written and paced story that it's not that big of a deal. that you're like waiting and you're not bored at all throughout the storyline. It's similarly as enjoyable as the previous Yeti involved story in the fact that it's weird magic robot balls controlling big fuzzy creatures, and now they're fighting the army in the London Underground, which, mind you, obviously is sets. Though they tried to actively film it in the actual London Underground, they couldn't do that for reasons that are very obvious. Why they thought they could get that to happen is beyond me, but okay. Regardless, similarly, this is a definite recommendation. This is an incredibly enjoyable storyline, and I would absolutely say that it is that cool, well-written sci-fi stuff that's in the middle of being a little bit too goofy, and perfectly serious. You know, this is one that I have a lot of fun with in the exact same ways I do with the original Yeti storyline. I would have loved to see more of these Yeti guys. Again, we don't see the Great Intelligence till the friggin' 11th Doctor era. I mean, technically we see it and the Yetis in downtime later on, a semi-official Doctor Who thing, which I'll eventually get to like a while from now. But in reality, though they're mentioned several times, certainly, the Yetis don't make a real appearance for a long time in like official Doctor Who media, and that's unfortunate. I love them. I love these goofy little guys. I'm gonna call them the Chumbly of this season, if you will. If you remember from the past, we had the Chumblies from Galaxy 4, and I kind of want to crown a Chumbly a season of funny little weird thing every season, right? First season we had the Morpho. You know, here's our like previous ones throughout these seasons, and we're gonna crown one every season, a weird little wacky creature that we're not meant to take as a funny little Pokemon, but it sure is here. I think the story is a great showing of the Doctor and the fact that he is an incredibly smart man, with him really showing his like being able to deal with like technical things, and the fact that he is a real handyman, the fact that he's able to reprogram a Great Intelligence little metal robot ball is, I think, a really great part of the story, and really shows you how smart the Doctor is and how capable he is. And both this story and the previous one I forgot to mention is a great showing of Jamie. Jamie gets put through some tough shit in every story and still is able to try his best, right? He's always nearly at the brink of death and is able to figure something out. He's a goofy little himbo who doesn't really know what technology is or a lot about history, and he always just goes with it, and it's always so entertaining. Him and the Second Doctor are always great whenever they're on screen. I love them to absolute death. Again, we love our two gay dads, but I will say that really his strengths are when he's alone, and when he has to be like, all right, gotta figure this out. I'm stuck underground with some Yetis. Let me just figure something out. And he does a great job. Yeah, he messed up the Doctor's plan, but, you know, maybe the Doctor should have told him. Why didn't he do that? And, you know, same with the previous story. Bro's undercover. He is in a horrible situation. Victoria's about to ruin the whole damn thing, and he's able to think on the fly and like able to figure stuff out and figure out a good plan to try and help the Doctor. He was also straight like ready to throw hands with a friggin' dictator, and now in this story you have him about to fight a friggin' monster. You know, it's like it's great. I love Jamie. If you're not a fan of Victoria, then you'll be happy to hear that Fury of the Deep is her last story. Sorry, Fury from the Deep. Fury from the Deep. Not of. Oh my god. Apart from several short clips, all 6 episodes are missing from Fury from the Deep, thus making it one of the most missing stories. God knows when you're watching it, all you will see is these little pictures, and they constantly reuse the same couple of ones. Some of these most known clips are, of course, the you know, most well-known face in it, which is from the duo of Quill and Oak, making really spooky little faces at people. They're being controlled by a bubbly, weird weed creature that apparently has grown into sentience. I'm not going to go into too much detail. God knows not every single story needs a whole thing in it. The Doctor and friends find themselves by a pipe, where, of course, we get the first appearance of the sonic screwdriver, which was just an idea made suddenly. A safety whistle from a life preserver was then used as the actual prop for the sonic screwdriver, of which it was then used to just be a screwdriver. That's all the screwdriver was supposed to be, like, initially, and then it was readapted later on. We'll certainly get to why, but it's fine to see its initial appearance just be a screwdriver. After being shot with tranquilizers, they're brought to a base where soon enough they find out that some wacky stuff's going on. Evil weed creature. The only real interesting part is the fact that the doctor goes, he's delirious from the weed, and I go, me too, doctor, me too. In order to give any shits about this story, I would need to be high as balls. Unlike most Doctor Who stories, no one dies in this, and boy, not a single damn thing happens in this fucking story besides an evil weed creature being screamed at by Victoria. The Doctor hooks her up to a scream machine, which PS isn't even Deborah Wetling, it was a whole other person. She was sick, so they had to get one of the assistant floor managers to actually scream for her. So yeah, cool. If it's not clear, I'm not a fan of this story. I find this to be actively one of the worst Doctor Who stories of all time. Is that because all of its footage is missing? Maybe that might be the case. I feel like maybe if I could actually see the plot, I would be more interested. And that just kind of is the case for this era, and that it is harder to get into certain stories when you can't really, I don't know, watch them. But I am the kind of guy that enjoys stuff like the storyline Marco Polo, which is also as similarly missing, if not more missing, right? And the fact that I can enjoy these stories in the same way you can enjoy the like audio stuff during the like 8th Doctor's period is a really good showing of the fact that I don't hate certain stories because I can't see them, though that might be a factor into why I don't enjoy them as much as I want to. This storyline is still super boring. The writer was almost going to make it sentient mud, for God's sakes, and that would have been even worse somehow. Teaming up with Hugh David from The Underwater Menace, the writer of this storyline is Mr. Pemberton, who ultimately, due to the fact that every episode is missing, he's the only writer to not have a single surviving Doctor Who episode in this era. He was not a good writer. None of this storyline felt at all well written. It was increasingly boring. None of the characters were thinking ever at any point. Everyone was a total moron when evil weed creature made them all go wacky. It's so stupid. One of the most boring and badly written plots in the entirety of Doctor Who. I hate Fury from the Deep. This is absolutely one of the lowest on my list in terms of all storylines in general. And you'd think it's because it does like something in particular of it. Takes a character that we know and makes him do something bad and stupid. It just, no. All the supporting cast are annoying. The main villain is a stupid, weird weed creature. The plot is boring as all piss for 6 whole episodes, where you could have easily have finished it in 2. Unfortunately, it is one that you have to watch, right? Because if the rest of this season is so good that you will want to know what the fuck happens to Victoria, who decides by the end of this, as throughout the storyline, she was getting a little bit tired of all this crazy stuff happening all the time. She decides by the end to stay with 2 of the researchers, the childless Frank and Maggie Harris. In 68, she now lived in a more modern time and was able to sort of get used to modern day and how it worked in compared to her time frame. Victoria would marry, have several children, and the character would note that this time with the Doctor was the most exciting part of her life. She was seen in Dimensions in Time, and also later in Downtime. She would return, and we'll certainly get to that later, to deal with the Great Intelligence, and that's pretty cool. Almost returning to the 5 Doctors in 1983, but, the actress turned it down to be in the Dave Allen Show, which, got canceled soon afterwards, so raw deal there. We now have to say goodbye to Victoria and fucking bye-bye. Yeah, one of the worst companions there ever was. She's not like Dodo, who is actively annoying, but Victoria never did anything important ever throughout the entirety of her storylines. We never really learned who she was as a character. She never added to the duo that was our 2 favorite gay dads. She is their daughter, right? That's her point. She's meant to be the next daughter figure of the Doctor, but she never added anything. She never had her own personality. She was always part of the plot, and a lot of it was getting kidnapped and screaming. When they were saved by the helicopter, she stood there and went, "I'm scared, Doctor. I can't." Like, run, bitch. You're getting shot at. And sometimes it's like, listen, it's the Audric thing, right? The actress wasn't 14 when she was playing the character, but the character was 14, 15, right? She's a young kid, right? Victoria is a young kid and she's not ready for these adventures. It makes sense on why she would want to stay after the weed adventure. But the fact that she just is here and wastes time ultimately shows you the fact that she was not supposed to be there the whole time. For instance, Susan was also similarly a young character, probably I think older than Victoria, but she always attempted to help out. She always had something to actually add to the plots of the story. She had her own thing going on that she would do throughout the storylines, especially towards the ending of her time. Polly would often be a lot more helpful because she often would try and help out the Doctor in her own way. She figured out one of the weaknesses of the fucking Cybermen, right? She went gung-ho with that and helped out. She was useful, and that is never here with Victoria. I don't know why I care so much. I wasn't even this mad with fucking Dodo, but I really got tired of Victoria towards the end of the time. Dodo just is easy to hate because you're like, ah, whatever, bye. You know, okay, no one liked you anyway, and you barely helped, and your little flu almost killed a bunch of people. You're stupid, Dodo is dumb and bad. But like, Victoria is a character that you wanted to like, right? Because she at least, because of the story that she like started in, and the fact that the Doctor cares so much for her and actively like jeopardized his life in order to save her, right? The little arc that was almost there is then goes unfulfilled and then never has anything happen with it. And then she leaves, like, cool, thanks. I saved your life and all that, but I guess you'll just fuck off. Bye. Thankfully, though, I feel like the character was well acted still by the actress, right? Regardless of how a character is written, I always want to respect the actual actress, and thus, what was her life like? Deborah Watling was, of course, a child actress who had various roles, one of which was the regular role as the niece of Peter Brady in The Invisible Man in 1958, the lead role in Alice in 65, and later in BBC's The Wednesday Play. Soon enough, she would get her role on Doctor Who, thanks to connections mostly with her dad, and then afterwards would have various small roles throughout the 70s, like Take Me High, That'll Be the Day, Arthur of the Britons, Rising Damp, and even played Norma Baker, a relatively recurring character in Danger UXB. Mostly deciding to focus more on theater throughout the later parts of her life, she would on the occasion return to Doctor Who. Already mentioned the other times she appeared, but also was in various audio dramas, still playing Victoria. Though her character might actually still be around, though I'd imagine that, might change in the future, we unfortunately have to once again talk about the fact that an actress that we had seen has unfortunately passed away. In July of 2017, at the age of 69, 6 days after being diagnosed with lung cancer, she would pass away. Though I don't enjoy her character, I do think that she absolutely had a love for being the character and her time there. Though I don't think the character contributed much, I do think the actress clearly contributed a lot towards the betterment of the actual backstage feel and how the production of the stories went. Time to round off our season with The Wheel in Space. Only episodes 3 and 6 exist in the archives. 6 was found with the main group found during the big search, but episode 3 was found by a private collector randomly in '83. It really does make you wonder that somewhere in some attics there are lost episodes somewhere, and boy, check your attics if you're British. Written by David Whittaker and directed by Tristan de Very-Cole, who had previously been an uncredited production assistant for the Dalek Invasion of Earth and the Gunfighters. We end our season kind of where we began with the Cybermen. The TARDIS is now suddenly on aboard a spaceship, the Silver Carrier, where the Doctor and Jamie are attacked by a little robot. This could also be the Chumbly of the season, but considering the fact that it is during a part where we can barely see it, and it's only in a picture, I am not counting it. Contacting a nearby spaceship due to the fact that the Doctor did get injured by the robot, they are then found the Wheel. It's essentially Deep Space Nine, and if you don't know Deep Space Nine, then change that. But they're there to observe phenomena in deep space. They found the fact that apparently a sun had recently supernovaed, so they're checking that out. The crew are concerned by sudden drops in pressure, with unknown to them is the fact that cybermats are showing up. Several parts of their ship have been messed up, and quickly Jamie is, almost blamed for it, but it's kind of pushed back by some of the crew going, hey, calm down. One of them, of course, being Zoe. Zoe Harriet is here. She's immediately incredibly funny because she's a big smartass. You'd think it'd be annoying, but she actually bounces off very well against Jamie, who, of course, being a big himbo, has no idea what she's talking about. And when he says something that's a lot more older, she has no idea what he's talking about. So it's comedy gold every time they're on screen. The Doctor is resting, so thus Jamie has to sort of take control of the big laser that the wheel has, which tries to blow up the spaceship. Seeing that the TARDIS is on it, Jamie actively has to mess up the laser, which of course, gets him put back into the sick room where the Doctor is, where they're kept there due to the fact that now they think that they're saboteurs. Soon enough, they find out that they are not the saboteurs, and the space madness of the guy in charge of the wheel starts getting to him, and people start being slowly controlled by weird, brain controlling things made by the Cybermen. Soon enough, the Doctor is able to convince enough people to have him help them deal with the Cybermen. Eventually, we do figure out that the reason why they're all the way out here is because the Cybermen wanted to lure a big spaceship all the way out here, so they made a star supernova, and it's like, if you're able to do that, use your ships that can do that against the Earth, what? Though it takes them a while, as they fend off the Cybermen, they are able to get the laser back working, not only to deal with the meteor shower that is certainly around them, but also soon enough, this encroaching Cybermen. The Cybermen are fought off and blown right this shit up, with Zoe ultimately deciding to stow away with our characters as they just up and leave afterwards, as they tend to do. The Doctor doesn't want to stick around in a place too long because, hey, storyline over, let's leave. Zoe, because of the whole storyline, it's totally shat on by all of the very rude people running the wheel in space, decides that she wants to learn more about the world that she can't learn in books. It's a little bit of like a Vicky kind of thing, and just due to the fact that she was immediately much more interesting and fun, oh boy, I cannot wait to see more of Zoe. Our director apparently had a bad time with the producer, both of them clashing heads constantly, with Peter Bryant actually alleging that Veracol went over budget, but actually the Wheel in Space was one of the few ones that actually perfectly fit the budget. It is to note that this is the first appearance of the Cyber Planner, the thing that is apparently always in charge even when we don't ever see it, from far away on their ships. This weird little brain in a jar with a bunch of glowy things around it, and also the first appearance of the John Smith alias, which was randomly inspired by the fact that Jamie read a stethoscope bearing the label John Smith and Associates. But more importantly, the Cybermen look exactly the way they should. This is one of my favorite designs of the Cybermen in terms of the classic era, and I think they'll get better before getting worse by using this sort of idea. They got the teardrops, they got the more sleek design, they don't have too much shit going on, but they got the chest things. They look great. I love how they look in this, and they probably would be a lot more threatening if they did anything. My biggest problem with this story is the fact that not much happens in it, right? They take forever to get to the Cybermen, who ultimately then take forever to get onto the actual ship, and then are easily thrown off of it, right? I feel like where they were in episode 6 should have really been where they were in episode 3, and the rest of the story should have been them dealing with them in a similar way to how they were dealing with the Yeti in the in the underground, similar to how other Cybermen stories are. Now we gotta deal with getting rid of them. The fact that they built up to them getting there in the first place really felt like you were wasting a lot of time. They wasted time in the wrong direction. If you want to have a long story with this whole premise, you could have easily did it. It's just not through taking forever to get to the Cybermen, but get the Cybermen first. We know it's the Cybermen. You literally reveal it early on. Ignore the fact that the Cybermen also show up in that episode. Having the Cybermats in general shows us that it's the Cybermen, so just have them. Why do we keep building to them? I don't know, it's a whole thing. The Wheel in Space is, I feel, unfortunately, a very weak ending to this season, right? It's not all that interesting. It's an okay showing from the Cybermen. It's one that I feel like isn't a bad storyline, certainly not compared to the previous story, but it's one that I can't really recommend. It's kind of one of those, it's fine to skip it. It's one that is recommended only because it's the first appearance of Zoe, and I think it's a great showing of her and Jamie especially. It's got some good moments with the Doctor, but a lot of it is just pretty fucking boring. If it's one that you want to skip, then I would recommend to skip, but it's not, one that I feel is all that bad, for instance. If you want to watch it, go ahead, but you don't gotta. Just know that Zoe is here, and she's here to stay for at least the end of the next season, and I cannot wait to see more of her. Despite any problems I may have with this season, I would say season 5 is a phenomenal season, right? It has a lot of really good stories that are all well paced. It does not waste your time. It's full, cool, strange sci-fi stuff that you expect from Doctor Who, and it's really where Doctor Who became what we know it for, right? Cool, weird storylines that try their best to fit the budget. We got the Ice Warriors, we got the Cybermen, we got the Yeti, we got weed. great season overall, right? Though Victoria is certainly a weak companion, there's a lot of great moments for both the Doctor and Jamie, and though some parts of it are still hard to watch, the parts that are there to watch are some of the best of the black and white era. Season 5, I think, really leaves a much better impression than the previous couple of seasons, and it really has, re-sparked my interest in continuing with the series, right? Obviously, I wasn't going to stop it anyway, but sometimes you get, like, a little bit Doctor Who'd out when you have, like, too many just kind of boring stories, but Season 5 has really reinvigorated that into making sure that I continue with the series. If you're watching along, would love to know how you feel about this season. I found it incredibly great. Let's put the rankings on screen and not forget it this time, please. Me in the future. But yeah, I found it a much better season. The overall rating somewhere down here of the season. Let's compare it to the previous couple of seasons as well. Put a bunch of shit on screen. Put a Morpho on screen. Put a Yeti on screen. I'll hate myself later. Here's a Chumbly. Yeah. Give me your opinions of this season in the comments. I found it an incredibly enjoyable season, and I hope you did as well. Of course, I hope you enjoyed this little run through and ramble of Season 5 of Classic Doctor Who. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this. And most importantly, stay good, stay safe, and don't be an asshole.